Opossum, the reason you're going home is because you're quite literally an animal. I don't even know how the hell you got onto this show. How anyone in the casting thought this was a good idea. I mean, fuck, I don't know. A little help? Greetings everyone, I'm EternalOpossum. For those of you who have been around my channel, you'll know that I really like talking about Hell's Kitchen. I've been making Hell's Kitchen videos for about 3 years now, starting from me talking about some of my favorite chefs, to talking about my favorite winners, to talking about the chefs and winners, to just a whole lot of shitposts. To say I'm very familiar with the show is an understatement, and I'd also say if you were to just mention a name like, I don't know, Janae or something, I probably immediately recognize who they are, their placement, and what dumb shit they did that got them eliminated. Oh, wait a minute. One of my earliest videos that I made that didn't sound like I was pissing Peter Pan's peanut ports was where I talked about the 10 most controversial eliminations in the show's history. I thought it was pretty good back then. It was one of the first times I tried incorporating some background music. It's probably the first time I really tried to lean into comedy. As a whole, I'd argue it was one of my better edited videos. That being said, however, I've gone on record saying I don't agree with this video nowadays, and much of the reason for that is because I had a very weird criteria on what made a controversial elimination, and that I based it on how controversial it was back then to now, and as such, I don't think the video has aged particularly well, especially when I find myself agreeing with a lot of the eliminations I've talked about and me leaving off a few I think are way more egregious. That's why I want to rectify that. I want to remake that list with my own personal top 10 bullshit eliminations in Hell's Kitchen. There's a number of eliminations that fans find really questionable or at the very least strange, but I'm gonna be completely honest, there's very few I find downright unfair. Yeah, shocking to hear, but I don't think Hell's Kitchen has that many eliminations I consider bullshit. Of course, there's some that exist and we all hate, but I think for the most part, a lot of the more controversial eliminations make much more sense when you think about it from Ramsay's point of view. Something like Vinny's elimination in Season 8 may be shocking upon first glance, but when you remember he had been on a spiral, whereas Gail, while her performance was bad, you could just write it off as having a particularly bad night. It makes a lot more sense that way. Or even Chris's early elimination in Season 12, where despite having some talent, he already had 3 bad performances before, and having such a bad performance on the pizza station pretty much signed his death warrant. And those are just some examples. But what about those eliminations that I could flat out say, yeah, that's hella bullshit? Before we go any further, just a few quick rules. First, since this is a list about eliminations, consider this a spoiler warning, especially considering some of the selections I've made are from the later seasons. Second, I am not going to be counting challenge eliminations. That means no Cook for Your Life challenge, no Black Jacket challenge, and especially no Final Tasting challenge. As much as I hate to say it, many of those eliminations simply came down to which chef had the better dish, and the eliminated one unfortunately underperformed at the worst time possible. That of course means that Nick's elimination from All Stars will not be on the list, even though I will fully agree that having a guy who looks like a discount Arnold Schwarzenegger choose the winning dish is really fucking stupid. Finally, keep in mind this is all my opinion. I don't expect you to agree with some of the omissions from this list, or even agree with some of my reasoning as to why some eliminations are in the spot they are. What I am expecting, however, is some decorum about it, because I like talking about hot takes, and I'd rather it not be ruined. With all that being said, let's talk about the revamped 10 most bullshit eliminations in Hell's Kitchen. Like I said earlier, I don't think Hell's Kitchen has that many bullshit eliminations. Some are questionable, sure, but rarely do I think many of them are outright unfair. At least a third of the reason for that is because the more you think about them, you might understand a bit more, especially once you factor in Ramsay's point of view. One of the other thirds is that sometimes that elimination will make some sense once you take out some of the context. Lou Ross's elimination is one of those eliminations that I will freely admit I mixed on for one reason that I'll talk about after I sum up what happened to him. So Lou Ross started out as one of the stronger members on the blue team, and considering how little they won in challenges and in general, that's saying a lot. Add on to him being one of the more likable chefs this season, and you have a potential winner on your hands. Unfortunately, around the 5th episode, he started to slip more and more, getting nominated after a poor performance on meat, and managing to avoid nomination by being on the winning team after a bad night on fish. Making things even worse was the team, especially Jen, not treating him with much respect. This all culminates in the final 7 service, where after a poor performance on Meat, he's put up alongside Jen and eliminated after Petroza says he should be the one eliminated. Now, if it were to just end there, Lou Ross would qualify for this list. Yes, I know that not many people like Jen this season, but to be completely honest, if I had to choose a chef who was the worst performer on the blue team that night, then it would easily be Lou Ross. I mean, a table walked out on him. That's about as bad as you could get. But the reason as to why Lou Ross ends up on this list is actually because of what happens after he leaves. Ramsay would say he's not done and calls up Matt from the winning team and nominated him himself. And the thing is that as bad as Lou Ross was this service, I'd argue that Matt was 7 times worse. The dude was kicked off not 1, but 2 stations because he couldn't handle it and threw a temper tantrum. And then throughout entrees, Matt just sat there looking like he just got caught with gum and didn't have enough for the whole class. Matt being called up in spite of him being on the winning team would imply that Ramsay always had this ability to eliminate him instead of Lou Ross, but instead called him up to do a team switch that was ultimately pointless because Black Jackets were the very next episode. The fact that Lou Ross, to this day, is the one chef to be eliminated traditionally and not get an exit interview for the sake of a pointless twist is hella bullshit. Plus, the fact that Matt ended up in Black Jackets as a result is enough of a reason to put Lou Ross on the list, even if his performance was low-key bad. Before we go any further, I need to talk about one aspect when it comes to eliminations that I think goes a bit unnoticed by fans, and that's the pleas. Pleas are the nominated chef's last real effort to prove on why they should stay in Hell's Kitchen, and I feel there's a real art form when it comes to them. On one hand, a really good plea can save someone who had a bad night and stood a real chance of going home, and often those pleas are looked at as some of the best parts of the season. On the other hand, a really bad plea, especially from someone who needs to have an insanely good one when the time calls, can absolutely sink their chances. And it just so happens that some of these bad pleas correlate with some pretty controversial eliminations. The Season 16 Blue Team is many things. It's toxic, it's aggravating, and most importantly of all, felt like the producers decided to cast the average Rumble streamer and entice them more by bringing a discount Asmongold onto the show. Everyone said their piece about how terrible the Blue Team is, as well as poor Aaron getting the short end of the stick. Let's face it, Aaron was not winning Hell's Kitchen. As nice as he was and having clear talent, the dude had struggles in the kitchen, and it didn't help he was practically new meat compared to the 4chan gang. Meaning he was not getting a whole lot of respect from the team. This all culminated in Aaron getting the boot in 14th place after a less than amazing plea, but not without some encouragement from Ramsay. Now, what I said sounds pretty reasonable, right? Inexperienced, meek, pushed around a lot. He was practically Season 14 Michelle, but without the backbone or the more honed talent needed to get far. But you want to know how many mistakes he made on the night he was eliminated? 0. Yeah, I'm not even pulling your leg or playing a joke. Aaron legitimately did nothing wrong that night. He didn't stand out, sure, but honestly, he was a hell of a lot better than how he did previously, and especially compared to Devin, Andrew, and especially Johnny. I'll be honest, I would completely sacrifice Johnny's incredible elimination, not just for Aaron to be given another chance, but also because less of the Toxic 4 is something I need injected into my bloodstream. That being said, I do kind of understand as to why Aaron was sent home. Again, he was inexperienced and lacked any real support, and that less than amazing plea didn't help matters. It's much like Lou Ross, where if you take out some of the context, you can understand it a bit more. Still bullshit though, and it only reminds me after rewatch Season 16, meaning I'm having more of an urge to drown myself. Oh goody, we're still talking about Season 16, my least favorite season. This season is so bad that I want to do many things, like drink battery acid, or drive a car into an orphanage, or break a chair. Hang on a moment. So I'm about to lay down some truth for you, and it's that Ramsay is not the most consistent. Sometimes what might be acceptable in one instance is unacceptable in another. Sometimes what might get someone eliminated in one scenario will instead keep them around for some reason. Sometimes Ramsay will not care about what happens in the dorms, and sometimes he's Season 16 Ramsay. With the elimination of Aaron, that meant the only outwardly likable chef on the blue team had been eliminated, leaving fans scrambling to find the one chef on the blue team that didn't make them want to swallow a live pipe bomb. Devin was the obvious choice since he was being pushed around a lot, while Coop was a fairly distant second place. I don't know why, probably something about waiters that was taken out of context. In spite of a few struggles, one of which being the best cut in the show's history, and no, I'm not talking about the manicure he gave himself, Coop was doing reasonably well. That was until the final 11 where he had an awful performance on the fish station. Okay, pretty bad, but Paulie did have a just as bad, if not worse service than Coop, and Paulie had started to spiral fairly recently. Plus, Coop had for the most part managed to defend himself calmly and rationally, so as long as he didn't do anything crazy like, and he just spiked a chair like it was a football in a game he had already lost half an hour ago, and this happens to be the catalyst in his elimination after Paulie pulls a Micah Bell and rats. Again, it's like what I said about Ramsay earlier as to why Coop is on this list, and it's because he's pretty inconsistent on his decisions. Up until now, it was generally considered that Ramsay didn't give a damn about what happened in the dorms, which would explain as to why several disliked chefs made it as far as they did. Pretty much, you don't bring shit into service, you don't go home. Coop may have destroyed a chair, sure, but keep in mind that this was after yet another loss that saw the blue team get kicked out, and he at least didn't do it in service. And Coop up to this point was pretty chill. He was calm, he was rational, this was essentially an out of character moment. Even worse, I felt that Coop was in the midst of a little comeback where he doubted himself after his cut. It sucks to see a potential storyline, especially for someone who is at the very least somewhat likable compared to everyone else, get cut for the sake of keeping chefs that are about as tolerable as orange juice and strep throat. Also, I know a few people may find it strange that I'm putting Coop over Aaron, especially when Aaron made no mistakes while Coop at least went home on a not good night. The reason for this is because I had more faith in Coop in the long run than I did with Aaron. I like Aaron, but again, I don't think he was winning while having that little experience. While Coop, I could at the very least see something starring with him. At the very least, we get a fantastic exit interview, and it sums up my thoughts on the season as a whole. Trust me, when we get to season 16, I'm going to bitch so hard that you're going to have to make a whole new term for it. If there's anything that will be consistent in Hell's Kitchen, is that there will be that one chef who survives elimination time and time again. It could be for many reasons, like them having a lot of determination to succeed. Maybe it's because they're pushed around a lot and Ramsay sees through it. Or more commonly, it's because they have a very distinct personality that makes for good TV, actual performances be damned. You may like these chefs, but you're probably going to wonder at some point how the hell they're still here. This is not one of those chefs. Hell's Kitchen 23, or Head Chefs Only, is a pretty good season. Decent cast, incredible performances, a great winner, and above all, an actual kind of fire theme for the season. That being said, one of the most common criticisms I've seen of the season is how some of the eliminations are a bit questionable, which I personally don't agree with all that much. Anthony's elimination sucked, but he fumbled at such a bad time. If there was a dish I would say is the worst, it would be his. Joe, I would say, should have stayed over Amanda in the double elimination, but if I had to choose between him and Egypt, who should go home, then it would probably be him. And that just leaves Megan. Just from her first appearance alone, Megan was inspiring a lot of confidence. A 5 on her signature dish, some signs of leadership, and rocking the second most powerful name in Hell's Kitchen behind Christina, she seemed to have a shot. That wasn't until the final 13 where she was nominated for the first time for being too quiet. I mean, yeah, she didn't speak up that much, but she was still consistent, and I'd argue Magali, who was actually the one sent home that night, was more deserving as a nominee. So Megan being put up seemed like no big deal. And then she gets eliminated over Anne-Marie after she decides that helping her is more important than supporting her own station, and being nominated twice in a row. Here's the thing for me, and as to why I would put Megan on this list, it's because of what Ramsay says is the reason for her elimination. Because she was nominated twice in a row, Ramsay declares the team as having given up on her. And... huh? Like, if he were to say she dropped the ball in terms of managing disasters, I still wouldn't exactly agree with this elimination, since I think Anne-Marie needing help multiple times was worse, but at least I understand it a bit more. Having the reason for Megan's elimination be the team gave up on you after 2 nominations, when chefs like Elise exist and have the team not only clearly want you gone, but being nominated 4 times in a row, is a reminder that Ramsay can be pretty damn inconsistent on his reasoning sometimes. Do I think Megan was going to win? No, not really. I felt like she wasn't making black jackets personally, but I don't think she should have gone here, and especially not for an obviously bullshit reasoning. Still, I guess the benefit is more Anne-Marie, and personally, I am a-okay with that. When it comes to eliminations, I noticed there seems to be a Mount Rushmore for highly bullshit eliminations. One's from Season 11, one's from Season 9, and 2 of those eliminations are from All-Stars, one of which being Nick, who I'm omitting from this list. The reason as to why I'm bringing this up now is because I'm actually about to talk about one of those eliminations that have gone down in history as one of the worst. And who is it? So, I've talked about Jennifer's elimination plenty of times before. Hell, even in my original controversial eliminations list where I ranked it at number 4, so I'll try to keep it brief. Season 9's Red Team, otherwise known as the team fighting for not only the head chef position but also against Elise for screen time, is, to be honest, not that good. The only 2 chefs that could reasonably be considered anywhere near above average are Jennifer and Jamie. Natalie would also technically count, but I more associate her with the blue team because she's just built different. Out of everyone on the red team, Jennifer was easily the most competent in spite of a bit of a rocky start. She was consistent, she was sane, and most importantly of all, the first chef on the red team to actually get Elise to shut up for 5 minutes. Hell, she even seemed to be on a huge upward trend in the final 7 where she not only beat the up to this point near unstoppable Will in a challenge, but she also pulled a Trev and finished service by herself. Unfortunately, a flaw started to become obvious with Jennifer, where it was clear her leadership was not up to snuff. Her charity night was not very impressive, and this correlated with her performances taking a bit of a tumble throughout the Black Jackets. This all culminated in the final 5 service where... okay, here we go. Here's the thing about this elimination, and it's that I do understand it in a weird way. If I had to choose between a chef who was consistent but had clearly poor leadership skills, and a chef who was about as bearable as gangrene but had leadership skills on who would be better on running the pass, then I unfortunately choose the latter. Otherwise, it comes down to 2 chefs who could clearly run the kitchen and 2 chefs who couldn't. If Ramsay were to just say, "Jennifer, I need a voice from you," and I don't got it, then I'd understand it. It'd mean more Elise, yes, but at the very least, I get where Ramsay is coming from. But we have to have the Paul and Will betrayal just to dick it all up! I don't get the point of this, I really don't. Why would you have the 2 chefs who are pretty much guaranteed to make the finals and have been likable up to this point, side of the biggest cancer the season has for the sake of making what could have been an understandable elimination downright infuriating? When the one chef who comes out of this looking sane by comparison is Tommy, you know it's bad. Again, I'd understand the elimination if it were just simply Ramsay saying he can't see someone who has no voice running the pass, which is the main reason as to why this avoids the top 5, but it's only barely because of this whole fucking song and dance. And I'm really hoping I'm done talking about this elimination because watching this makes me want to shit the bed. So we're officially halfway through the list, and I think it's time I admit something. Every single elimination we've talked about so far, from Blue Ross to Jennifer, are eliminations that, while I don't agree with them, I can understand them in a way. These next few eliminations, however, are going to be the ones that I can flat out say I do not agree with for a variety of reasons. It can either be because of how obviously forced it is, it can be because I don't think they were the main issue that night, or in this chef's case, it's a massively wasted opportunity. Hey look, we're talking about Season 11 early. Christmas came early, except instead of a present, it's news from your parents that they're getting divorced. It's no secret that Season 11's blue team is one of, if not the worst team in the show's history, and the run seen by this team is about as depressing to watch as the state of The Walking Dead nowadays. Barely anyone displayed much in the way of real skill, and even the ones who did were dragged down by a persistent flaw they had. One of those unfortunate souls that were trapped in Season 11 was Dan, easily one of the least popular members of the team for a variety of reasons. He was cocky, argued with his team, and was generally a dick to everyone. Granted, some of that was justified as seen when Ray decided to hog the fish station, but for the most part, Dan was arrogant as shit and no one liked him that much. That being said, however, Dan was legitimately one of the few chefs on the blue team one could look at and say, you know what, you're halfway decent. So for all the bragging he did, it was at least somewhat justified. Unfortunately for him, as good as he could cook, Dan's biggest issue was that he just refused to tone down his dickishness for 5 minutes to work with the team. And after messing up a pizza in the final 14, he was sent home for being too much of a wild card, and like Coop before, had one of the best exit interviews. Here's the thing about Dan and why he's in the top 5, especially over someone like Jennifer, whose elimination is a little more questionable to some people. The reason for Dan's elimination I actually do agree with. If he can't work for the team and has no desire to try, then yeah, I wouldn't waste my time with him. The issue is, and the reason as to why he's up this high, is where he goes out. Especially when it comes to who he's eliminated over in Barrett. Contrary to popular belief, I actually don't think Barrett was weak all the way through. Sure, he's like number 7 at best when it comes to the blue team, but he started out alright until he decided to try killing people, one of which being sous chef James' pregnant wife. Yeah, I'm not even joking, in the final 14, Barrett nearly served raw chicken, mind you, to sous chef James' pregnant wife. This alone should have gotten him not only kicked out of Hell's Kitchen, but barred from every cast iron pan in existence. But no, Barrett survives somehow and becomes the luckiest fucking chef in the show's history. Yeah, even more than Andrea, because at least she had immunity. Barrett had no immunity, no drama potential, and was coming off a service where he tried to get halfway to a UAV by killing the wife, child, and himself after James rounds on him. He should have been gone, and Dan would have continued to be one of the few outright interesting chefs on a bland as fuck season. I don't think he would have made the top 10, and if anything, he would have replaced Barrett as part of that double elimination, but at the very least, it would have meant he didn't go home on a night where someone tried to speedrun killing someone's family and turning sous chef James into a balder Batman without the latex bat nipples. But nope, Dan inexplicably goes home here in spite of having every reason to stay, both from a cooking standpoint and a drama standpoint, and it's easily one of the biggest mistakes in a season full of them. God, I can't wait to talk about season 11. Seriously, I can't. It's gonna be something special. I'm gonna be real with you guys. It's gonna be wild. I think it's a general consensus that it took until around season 5 for Hell's Kitchen to really start hitting its stride, and much of the reason for that is because the first 4 seasons lacked much of the mechanics of what made Hell's Kitchen, well, Hell's Kitchen. One of those parts that was missing early on was Ramsay calling up other chefs who he thought should be nominated, which didn't happen until season 2. Back in season 1, Ramsay had to choose between the 2 chefs selected no matter how bad they did, and this was something that the winner of the season exploited to very successful effect. I've always felt that Chris fell into the kind of underrated category for me. Sure, he wasn't going to win just based on his challenge record alone, but he was competent, a solid leader, and he had more than a few charming moments. Hell, I'd argue it was enough for his ego to be justified. Unfortunately for him, Ramsay did not think the same way. Throughout the season, Chris was picked at a lot by Ramsay for the horrific crime of being an executive chef. Why he didn't pick at Ralph and Michael for the same issue, I have no idea. Although I'm guessing in Michael's case, he probably has something on him. Wouldn't put it past him. Speaking of which, in spite of Chris having an angry Scottish man breathing down his neck, he was still one of the frontrunners of the competition, and Michael was more than aware of it. After getting best of the worst in the 5th service, Michael would blindside Chris by putting him up alongside Elsie, resulting in his elimination. It's a pretty impactful moment and easily the best first example of a real shocker elimination. And before you say anything, yes, I know Mary Ellen exists, but at the same time, who? Chris's elimination also kickstarted Michael being the biggest fucking rat in the show's history, and I love him for it. That being said, as impactful as this elimination was, I think it's also really easy to forget that it's kinda bullshit. Like, in spite of Chris being arrogant, he could back up his words in the kitchen, and I wouldn't even say his service was that bad. Really, the worst it got was him saying "we chef" and getting Ramsay pissed off at him. So I can confidently say that if logic were to apply to future seasons, Benjamin is one of the luckiest fuckers of all time. Speaking of luck, everyone's talked about Jimmy and how lucky he was that Ramsay couldn't call people up yet, but what about Elsie? I know you're probably going to hate me for saying this, but I argue that Elsie was more at risk for going home that night. Her night wasn't particularly good, and she literally admitted to not being sure if she could handle the pressure. Like, that alone should send her home. But Chris gets sent home because, in Ramsay's words, he couldn't live up to his title? Just, no. Absolutely no. This whole elimination is a bigger stretch than Stretch Armstrong without being made into a kink. Like, say what you want about Jennifer and Aaron, but I can get at least some reason as to why they were sent home, even if I don't like it. Chris's elimination just doesn't make much sense, and I even go as far as to say he wasn't just screwed over by early installment weirdness, he was screwed over because Ramsay hated him, and to cement Michael as a conniving threat who managed to get away with shitting on Ramsay's doorstep and somehow matching the DNA to Chris. And we got 3 more to go. Oh boy. We've talked about a lot of eliminations up to this point, from the understandable without context, to the pretty questionable, to the ones that are just straight up bullshit for one reason or another. But what if I told you the worst type of elimination isn't the ones without context, the ones that are head scratching, or even the ones that are just flat BS? No, my friends, the worst ones without a doubt are the ones that are forced. The ones you can tell without a shadow of a doubt are done because of some narrative that needs to be filled. It's a shock elimination, not for the sake of a shock elimination. It's a shock elimination that's done because someone said you don't fit in with what we want for the remainder of the season. And Chris's elimination, as well as these last 3, are easily some of the most blatant, in-your-face, explosion-sized, forced eliminations ever. And who is the first one we're talking about? I think it's clear from my words in the dance segment that I do not hold season 11 in very high regard, and much of the reason for that is because of the cast. So many of them are bland, boring, or just outright annoying for one reason or another. One of those chefs that just so happened to not fall into this category was Anthony, easily one of the very few highlights of the season. It's a general consensus that John was the lone shining star of the awful blue team in season 11, but if there was anyone who could come reasonably close, it was Anthony. Throughout the season, Anthony was easily one of the most consistent and strong chefs of not only the blue team, but I'd argue of the season. Hell, I'd even argue he was stronger than John early on, and the fact that he was responsible for the blue team getting some of their very rare victories made him a potential dark horse pick for winning. Unfortunately for him, this season already had a favorite member of the blue team whether he liked it or not, and he started to crack around the top 9. That being said, Zach and Michael also had a bad night, and Anthony did recover by the next service. Add on to chefs like Janelle also having a bad night around that time, and it meant that Anthony was for the most part pretty safe. That wasn't until the final 7 where he just... yikes. Okay, first off, he scored 0 points in the blind taste test, which is bad considering no chef up to this point had flopped on the test and won. But then again, no winner had a good signature dish up until around Paul's, so maybe this would be different. Then he completely messed up the invoice because, of course, the blue team needed to suffer more. He then tops this all off with an awful performance on fish, and it gets John to nominate him. Finally, after an admittedly kinda weak plea, he's sent home. Now, look. I know I just talked about pleas and how important they are. Hell, it's one of the reasons as to why I could stomach Aaron's elimination and put it low. Logic dictates that Anthony should be lower on the list considering that 1, his plea wasn't that strong, and 2, he at least had a bad night. But I just can't when Zach was 10 times worse! Not only was Grant Banks here on a clear decline ever since the final 12, but his service tonight I'd argue was just as bad, if not worse than Anthony's. He fucked up a whole bunch of lamb, couldn't recite an order, continued to give more and more excuses and not take any level of accountability, and perhaps worst of all, did so fucking poorly on the meat station that not only did Ramsay have to go over to the Red Kitchen and grab Wellingtons from there, but he eventually had to take over his whole section! The fact that Zach managed to have a service this bad and still somehow managed to survive despite Anthony having more of a leg to stand on than Zacky Wacky even while injured is fucking ridiculous! Chef Banks, more like Chef Broke. I just don't get it. Fuck the whole excuse if he had a bad performance and a weak plea. Zach should have gone here, or at the very least been ejected and Anthony be eliminated right after. But no, not only do we have to have Anthony go here so we can fulfill the 22 episode quota because everyone loves a season that's the equivalent of sitting on the toilet for an hour and losing feeling in your legs, but also we have to boot him out because we have to fulfill the John arc where he's the only decent chef on the blue team, which is somehow the best version of this last chef standing arc because every other one is even more forced. I'm just so tired, man. This has gone on for so long and I'm losing my mind here. Moving on. I mentioned right before talking about Jennifer that there was a Mount Rushmore of sorts when it comes to bullshit eliminations. Eliminations that everyone hates for one reason or another and are often considered among the worst ever. I already talked about Jennifer and I just finished discussing Anthony, but it's time to talk about the third member and the only other one I'll talk about since, again, Nick isn't showing up here. And just my luck, it also comes from the disappointing stepchild that is Hell's Kitchen All-Stars. Hell's Kitchen's All-Stars is a season that many consider to be among one of Hell's Kitchen's biggest low points. Part of that is because of the many questionable eliminations, especially when it comes to the elimination challenges. That being said, I could, with the exception of Nick, see at least a reason for them going home. And I wouldn't say the season started out terribly enough. Hell, I'd say it started out pretty well. However, if anyone were to point to the exact moment the season took a nosedive into being Total Drama All-Stars 2.0, then it would definitely be when Van got the boot. Van being a part of All-Stars made a whole lot of sense. Back in Season 6, he was one of the most memorable personalities of the season. Hell, him coming back in the All-Star service in Season 9 meant the show knew how popular he was, so him being in a future season was pretty much written in the stars. In All-Stars, however, Van seemed to be a bit different from normal. While he still had his classic Van charm that we all knew and, depending on the person, loved, he was much more relaxed and chill this time around. Really, the closest we got to his Season 6 levels of rage was when it came to Josh, but then again, Josh was essentially a walking trigger button, so it wasn't like anyone was getting on Van for that. Van even seemed to be doing relatively well throughout most of his stay, with really the only time he came close to elimination being the 6th episode, and even then he lived because he wasn't playing make-believe of a cut. Then comes the final 10 episode, and it all goes ass over tea kettle. What happens is that Van goes quite a few times throughout the night and set up an overcooked salmon, which, in all fairness, is pretty bad. Not as bad as someone like Anthony's I just talked about, but still noticeable. That being said, however, we gotta talk about what happened on the red team that night, especially when it comes to Barbie and everyone's favorite Hell's Kitchen contestant, Elise. To sum up in a way that will be easier on my voice, Barbie was told to lead, only for Elise to take over and start giving confusing callouts. Then the two of them had a shouting match that was so loud customers could hear it, and not even a cold New York strip of them being brought into the pantry would stop their argument of the century. Essentially, Barbie and Elise had an argument so huge that it stopped service, and this alone should have made it so that one of them was pretty much set to go home. Except that didn't happen, because what actually happened was that Ramsay decided that All-Stars needed more arguing all over the product, and decided to hold 2 separate elimination ceremonies, where he sent home Van in the first one, and then spared both Barbie and Elise in the second. And I'm just... why? Ignoring the whole rumor that Van requested to leave, or he got in trouble at Vegas, it's such a confusing ass elimination considering that not only was he doing pretty damn well up to this point, but Barbie had been on a spiral and Elise was being Elise. The worst part is that, like I mentioned earlier, this is where the season really started to dip in quality. Yes, I know that Giovanni was the first elimination you could argue was questionable, but it was more of a hit than anything. And up to that point, it could be brushed off as having gotten rid of someone who reasonably wasn't going to win. Van's elimination, however, was where the mask was fully pulled off, where the season made it abundantly clear that it was going to screw over whoever it wanted, whenever it wanted, and leave the people who want to see those chefs succeed as depressed as I am reading this. Why do you think this episode has such a low score on IMDb? And yet, despite all that, there is still one elimination that I consider worse than that. One elimination that I just cannot find any reason for happening. And that chef is... going to be revealed right after a few honorable mentions. Yeah, before I reveal my pick for the most bullshit elimination here, I'm going to go over a few omissions. Eliminations that a lot of fans would find bullshit, but I personally don't for one reason or another. Or they could just be eliminations that just barely avoid making this list. Some of these eliminations I'm going to mention are also going to be from the original list, and I'm just going to quickly go over those ones first to explain why they're not on this list before getting into the real honorable mentions. I used to feel that John was screwed over, but I think a lot of it was because I was so unbearably bored with this season and really wanted John to win so I could at least say it was worth it. That being said, however, that pass, man. Good fucking lord, that pass performance. I mean, it speaks for itself. It's a bottom tier pass. That shit doesn't even belong in F tier. It belongs in semicolon tier. Steve's also in the category of eliminations I thought were bullshit back then, but nowadays, that plea, man, it's bad. It's shockingly bad, especially considering last time he was up, he had a fantastic plea that could rival even some of the best. Sorry, but Steve shot himself in the foot with that one. Yeah, this isn't really as bad as I said it was back then. Hassan was on a clear spiral, displayed no leadership, and served raw chicken multiple times. Let me repeat, raw chicken! Multiple times! On a sous chef's wedding night! How could you not be sent home after that? This is probably going to be the elimination I imagine that many people would be surprised to see not on the list, but to be honest, I don't find Patrick's elimination that bad. Yes, Tiffany's plea was awful, and I think it would have warranted a double elimination at least, but if I were to choose who should go home, I'd still say it should be Patrick. The dude was on a spiral and not living up to the promise he made to lead the team, so it's a case of a harder ceiling to break, harder fall if you fail. To be honest, I actually do agree with Natalie's elimination. Somewhat. I mean, she had a bad night, a really bad night at that. The only reason as to why she gets an honorable mention is because of Elise lying to Ramsay during service and not going home despite Brendan doing the same thing again to boot for it. Again, Ramsay's never been consistent with his reasonings. Okay, to be honest, Curse is here because I have tried making sushi before, and let me tell you, it's really difficult. It's nowhere close to burning cereal as I described back then, and putting Curse on sushi when he's already shown to be bad at it was a very strange decision. That being said, however, I can't help but think that if Curse were to just accept the nomination and try to have a good plea instead of just weaseling out of it, then maybe he'd have a better chance of surviving. It'd probably be enough to put him on the list if he didn't, but since he decided to worm his way out of it, he's just stuck as an honorable mention. Yeah, I know not many people like Sarah all that much, but I feel like she needs to get a mention here. Virginia had a service that was so bad that immunity was taken away from her, only for Ramsay to offer it back with the addition that if Virginia took it, then Sarah would automatically be eliminated. I get that Ramsay's a man of his word, but it shouldn't come at the expense of others, no matter how much of a scumbag they are. Dana's elimination from All Stars is on here for one reason and one reason only, and it's because of the whole broken oven fiasco. I unfortunately can't find a post from Christina that said the ovens were broken, but apparently Nick mentioned in a few interviews that the ovens were fucky, so I gotta at least mention her. Hey look, for the first time I'm talking about something from season 22. This elimination was for a while actually going to be on the list simply because of the fact that Jason got away with surviving after blaming the sous chefs, but the more I think about it, Danya not only had a pretty mid charity night, but this was her third nomination in a row. Plus the fact that Jason got a great elimination made it all the more worth it. Believe it or not, Adam was originally going to be on the list for a few reasons. One of the reasons was because he was doing really well up to this point, and the night he went home saw him have his first poor performance while Mark switched back to his bad attitude and have a bad night all in one. That being said, Adam flat out admitting he was holding back his skills was not a very good look for him, and it's what kept him from being on this list. Then again, you could just pretty much consider him an honorary number 11. Hey, so, fun fact, I'm recording this at 5 in the morning. Just goes to show how fucking exhausted I am. Before I announce number 1 on this list, I just want to say thank you. Seriously, I know it's an out of nowhere thing to bring up, especially considering how much I've been talking, but genuinely, I really do appreciate all the support. That original countdown video, even if I don't agree with it nowadays, means way more to me than I like to admit. Aside from what I said earlier about it being the first video, I really tried to add more stuff like comedy and edits. It's also one of the few videos that has a distinctly high number of views compared to my other videos. And if I'm going to be completely honest, it's the only video I feel a bit of pride in having this much notoriety, considering the only other 2 videos that come even close are an iceberg video where I didn't understand what an iceberg meant, and an essay video that sounds like I'm having my microphone for dinner with a side of peas. What I'm saying is that the success of that video made me really think about the possibility of doing an updated version of it, because now I'm looking more critically at eliminations instead of just blindly ranking them based on audience reaction, hence why I don't think there's that many bullshit eliminations in the first place. Even the worst ones I can maybe understand on some microscopic level. But this last one, I just cannot find any sort of excuse. This elimination was always going to rank high, but the more I thought about it, I came to the conclusion that this elimination had no reason to happen whatsoever. So I'm gonna get this out of the way. I don't particularly care for Jamie all too much. Hell, out of everyone on this list, she's probably the chef I like the least. Yeah, even more than Dan. At least he isn't boring as hell. That being said though, Jamie's elimination is one I can never find myself agreeing with under any circumstance. Like I mentioned earlier, Jamie, along with Jennifer, were some of the strongest chefs on the rather poor red team. She was fairly consistent, rather sane, and as a whole, seemed like the real frontrunner on red despite lacking a personality. Hell, after the final 11 service, after she got nominated for the first time, she bounced back pretty significantly by leaning out appetizers, meaning there was leadership potential in her. That even extends to her next service, which, while not good, was nowhere close to the level of Elise or Carrie, both of whom got kicked out of the kitchen while Jamie remained. As a whole, Jamie, while not being the most interesting, seemed to be on the track to getting a little bit, "What do you mean giving up?" Okay, so get this. During the final 9 service, Jamie ends up serving a salad with some hair in it, which, okay, that's not good. But then Ramsay automatically rounds on her by saying she's given up, and just, what do you mean? What do you mean by giving up? What do you mean by performing worse every service? She just came off a service where she showed off potential leadership. I'd even go as far as to say it was her best performance yet. What do you mean lack of fight back? She stayed in the kitchen and bounced back. What do you mean downward spiral? Jamie's elimination to me makes absolutely no sense on several different levels. Like, say what you want about Anthony, but at least you could argue he went home on a bad service. Jamie's service wasn't even that terrible. Hell, I consider it on the level of Vans and All-Stars. And may I remind you, she didn't even get kicked out of the kitchen that night while Lisa and Carrie were dragging everyone down like a bear hug on the Titanic. But you wanna know what really cements this at the #1 spot? What really makes this elimination worse than every other elimination? Have you noticed the common trend about every single elimination I've talked about so far? Even the honorable mentions? Every single one of these chefs had the opportunity to plead their case. Every single one. They may have been sent home, but they were at the very least given a fighting chance to stay in Hell's Kitchen. Jamie got no such chance! She was just eliminated without even being called down and declared as having given up! What does that mean? At least Anthony had a bad plea. At least Ramsay had somewhat of a reason to send Van home that was shown in service. The argument for Jamie being sent home because she gave up is nothing but an excuse. It's excuses, excuses. How am I supposed to believe this elimination when all the reason Jamie being sent home is an excuse? When are you going to learn that bullshit eliminations have consequences? Consequences that affect decent seasons, like this one. This is the one elimination I can never find any, and I really do mean this, any sort of reason for happening outside of wanting to keep the Carrie and Elise stuff going for one more episode. This was the night that one of them should have gone home. But no, we gotta sacrifice Jamie for this. I'm done, man. I'm not even in the mood for an outro like usual. My head hurts. I'm EternalOpossum, and I'll see you in the next video.